So I was reading this article in Vice called "Men Are Setting Gold Digger Tests on Dates and Women Are Over It." And basically in the article, it's talking about how apparently guys are starting to set up these tests for women to make sure that they're not gold diggers. And it has two stories. One story is about a guy who, after dinner, hands the girl the bill, and the bill's like $100, and he hands it to her and asks her to pay or something. And then she says, well, I'll pay my half. And then he said, oh, great, you're not a gold digger. And this woman was really upset about this. And when she posted to Reddit, a lot of people apparently were very supportive of her and saying this guy's being a dick and, he's disrespectful and it's a setup and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the second example was about a guy who told his date that he was a carpenter, even though I guess he has a much more typically high status job. And he told her he's a carpenter to test her to make sure that she wasn't just choosing him based on his career. And, a bunch of Reddit responses were negative about him too, talking about how he shouldn't start off a relationship with lies and blah, blah, blah. But the underlying theme of this is that men shouldn't be testing women. That's actually what it all comes down to, is they're saying that men, and actually at the bottom of the article, to close out the article, it says, whether it's fake job titles or surprise check handoffs, women are pointing out the pattern. These tests aren't clever, they're projections. And if your date is making you prove you're not a gold digger before the appetizers are cleared, they're probably the one bringing the baggage to the table. So what they're saying is that you shouldn't be testing. Now, first of all, this is just outrageous because women will sometimes refuse to go on a date with you based on where you want to take them. Obviously, that's a test. So you have this double standard here where men are not allowed to test women, but women are perfectly allowed to test men. And no one men complain about it, but of course, if men complain about it, the women will just say, oh, well, that's because you're a loser. So that's why, if you weren't a loser, then you wouldn't care about, me wanting to go whatever place. So you have this really ridiculous double standard. Now, a lot of guys will just be upset about this double standard and talk about how women are bad and blah, 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 blah. But, that's not my shtick at all. What I will say is that you absolutely, as a guy, should test women. Absolutely, 100%. 110% you should test women. And you could start testing them early, and you should start testing them early. However, the problem with these examples is these blatant tests, because women have, there's a strong idea about how great women are and how scummy and terrible men are. And so because of that, any requirements men put on women are seen as negative, and women are expected to put requirements on men and should put requirements on men. And how many times do you hear about women telling other women and guys telling women, oh, well, it's because your standards are too low. You need to raise your standards, right? That's always what they're telling women, that they need to raise their standards and they need to be more picky and more selective whenever women have bad experiences. They never tell women, oh, well, you're choosing wrong, your criteria is bad, whatever, something like that. Okay, so we have this issue with testing, and we need to test women, and it's about how you test them. Okay, now there's kind of two ways to test women. One way to test women that has been successfully used by many men over the years is to be more aloof and not seem very interested, and to be very playful and to tease her a lot. A lot of men try really hard to compliment women early on and try to show that they have a strong interest in them early on. And instead of doing that, what you can do is you can seem like you like them, but you're not so interested in them. You don't know if you want to date them. You don't know if they'd be a good long-term partner. You're just kind of finding out what they're like and sort of finding out if you're compatible. So having that mindset and being comfortable to make fun of her for, not in a malicious way, but making fun of her for, small things like you would with a guy friend or something like that. And the way you would tease a guy friend or the way you would tease a female friend that you're not interested in, bring that to the way you tease and playfully mess with a woman that you are romantically interested in. When you do that, it communicates that while you're happy to spend time with her and you like her, that you're not really sure about her. And so it subliminally communicates that you are not just open to any woman that shows up. And that implies that you have some choices. And when you have choices, women are going to be more interested. And because they're going to be more interested, now they're going to be putting in some level of effort towards you. So that's the first way to sort of, it's not exactly testing, but it is testing because you're testing for their interest level in you rather than you being focused on how can you get them interested in you. Rather than being focused on getting them interested in you, you're trying to shift the focus to more to her understanding, even kind of subconsciously, that she doesn't have your full attention, and that has to come over time as you get to know her better, and that as you get to know her better, then your interest could potentially increase rather than already being super interested from the beginning. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second way you test women is by the way you spend time with them. Okay, so I think it's, I don't know what your budget is, but whenever you take a woman out, you should take her to a place where you would be comfortable to pay for both of you. Whatever that means. Maybe that's a corner pizza shop. If that's a corner pizza shop, take her to a corner pizza shop. Now, if she has a problem with a corner pizza shop as a date, well, there you go. Already, that's a test enough. Now, that doesn't mean, if you suggest that and she says no, I want to eat, something, so typically, okay, let's back up. So typically when you're interacting with a woman, whether it's over text and you haven't met her yet because it's an internet thing or some kind of introduction, or whether it's someone that you met once in a social setting or somewhere and you talk to them in person and now, you're trying to plan a date with them. During the time that you're with her, you should have in mind some ideas of what kind of places you'd like to take her. So maybe one is a corner pizza shop. Maybe another is a cafe that has like really great desserts, for example. And maybe another one is maybe it's an exhibit at a museum or some kind of other event that's happening that, you could take her to. So let's say you have these kind of 3 ideas. So during the time that you're interacting with her, you could talk to her about not the specific date, but about the topic. So for example, you could talk to her about desserts. You could talk to her about pizza. And you could talk to her about different events that are going on. Not as you're inviting her yet, but just talking about these things as part of how you like to spend your time, what you like, getting to know what she likes, and you can sort of gauge her reaction to the various things you present. And then you choose to invite her on whichever of these activities, experiences that she seems most interested in. Now you've given her 3 options, and at least 3, and so you're taking her to one that she's going to be interested in. Now, if let's say you're out with her for, let's say, you go to this exhibition, and now after the exhibition, you guys want to get something to eat. Okay, well, you should have planned this out in advance so that okay, if we're going to go here, here's 3 places that we could go for dinner or for lunch or whatever, depending on what time you're meeting her. And all of these places should be places that you're familiar with and that you know how much they're going to cost. And so if she is not willing to pay, you are fine paying. And you should make sure, and this is very important, you should make sure that even if she orders the most expensive thing on the menu, that you won't mind, right? Because guys, they do this thing where they take girls out to these restaurants and maybe most of the stuff on the menu is like, 20 or 30 bucks, but then there's like a few items that are like 80, and then they get all pissed off when the girl orders the $80 thing on the menu. It's like, yeah, I mean, I understand that, you're unhappy about that, but you don't know this chick. It's a first date, so you have no idea what she's gonna do. It's like, would you let some chick you don't know just like spend a day in your house with you not there? No, of course you wouldn't, because you don't know what she's gonna do. She might call up a bunch of friends and have them come over and throw a party in your place for all you know. You wouldn't do that. But for some reason, guys do that with a first date by taking them to some place and just letting her run wild without making, creating some artificial boundaries. So the way to create artificial boundaries is not taking her to places that have things on the menu you wouldn't be comfortable paying for. So you picked out these 3 places. So then you can tell her, hey, do you want to go for this? Do you want to go for this? Or do you want to go for this? And you give her 3 choices. And then she says, oh, I want to go for this. Okay, great. And you take her to, now presumably, through conversation with her, the 3 places that you've picked, or do you want to have New York style pizza? Do you want to get Thai food, or do you want to get some Mexican? Let's just say. So let's say if you give her these 3, presumably you've already talked to her about food during the time you've been with her to some extent, so you know that the options you're presenting are things that she's likely to be cool with. So then when you take her to those places, now she could have some reactions. Maybe she goes and, she feels a little bit unhappy about the cost of the place. Well, that's fine. She can be unhappy about, the fact that it's not, some blowout thing, because the whole idea is that this is just a first date. And so one of the patterns you should set is that better places. And you could say, well, there's this other place that that's quite good. We could go there next time, or we could go there in the future. And so you're letting her know that about better places, but that's just not where you're going today. And presumably, the next time, if she wants to go out with you again, then you would suggest one of these slightly better places. Now, it doesn't have to be some, blowout, place that's the kind of place you take a girl for, a long time girl for Valentine's Day or something. But, you could show that it's slightly better than what you did on the first date. And that's always the way you should do it. A lot of guys do it the reverse, where they start off with really great places and then they gradually make them worse to get into their budget. You need to do it the other way around, where you start with the lower level places, and that as she sticks around, she gets better and better treatment. That is what makes girls feel much better about the direction things are moving. And it'll make you feel better too, because you don't feel like you're wasting your time and money on some chick that's not really interested. Now, there's the other thing. If you take her to a place that isn't special for it being, one of these Instagrammable places that's, expensive, then she's showing up because she's genuinely interested in you. And so there you go. That is a test. Now, of course, you can offer some places, and if she's sort of lukewarm on those places, then it's up to you to decide, are you willing to take her to a nicer place to see if she would then come? And now you could decide, okay, well, if she's only willing to go with me to one of these places, then she's a gold digger. Fine. Okay, then you don't have to date her, and that's cool. In all of these examples that I'm giving, the girl has no idea that you're testing her. She has no idea. She just thinks that you're being the way you are. And that's the way it should be done. People don't like to be tested. I mean, I know in a lot of ways, guys don't mind it as much. And that's mostly not because because they like the idea of knowing what the goalposts are and what they have to hit. They like the clarity, right? We generally know that there is some level of effort involved in the dating process. And if it's legible and clear and we know exactly what's expected and required of us, we often tend to prefer that over not having any idea and going at it blind. For whatever reason, women tend not to be as comfortable with that. And I should say, not only not be comfortable with it, as you could see from the Vice article example, they really hate it and they think it's rude because they think that they, should be automatically great to you, essentially. So that's the first example of a test, is you test them by where you take them. Now, there should be other tests. Some other tests would be things like, you're going to bring up certain topics. You should have a list of things that you want in a woman. And don't tell women about this list. As I told you, they hate this idea that men have standards. They really do. The idea that men have standards is loathsome to them. And, I don't know why it is, but that's just how it is. They like the idea that they are better than other women, but they don't like the idea that you actually are testing them to find out if they're better than other women. It's a funny, kind of paradox, but that's how it goes. So anyway, so you should have a list of traits that you're looking for in a woman, depending on the kind of lifestyle that you want to have and the kind of lifestyle that you do have. And, so I have some friends that are really into music, and they're really into going to live performances and live concerts. And, for me, that's not really my thing. So if you are someone that's like that, then one of your sort of tests is going to be talking to her about music and seeing if she has good taste in music. And if she doesn't have good taste in music, seeing if she's open to expanding her taste or being presented with or learning about better taste in music, better obviously by your standards. So that is an example of a standard or a test that you could have, especially if, you're very musically inclined. This could be for some of my friends, it's like this with visual media, like movies. For other people, it could be about activities. Some guys really like a more active type of woman, and they want to be going on walks and hikes and, bicycling and that sort of thing. And so that would be, another kind of test. It could be about healthy eating. That could be another example, healthy living. There are all sorts of things that, you should have as things that, that for you are important in a woman. Maybe it's how well read they are, or what sorts of things they read, what sort of media they consume. And during your course of knowing or of dating, you should be talking to her about this stuff and trying to draw out some of these things about her to see if she does meet your standard. And when she does, you communicate to her, not in such an overt way like this guy in the example where he said, "Oh, congratulations, you passed the test, you're not a gold digger." Instead, you just say, "Oh, wow, that's really great. I dated a woman before, she lacked that trait, and because of that, there were these problems in our relationship." Or you could say like, I wasn't satisfied in my last relationship because, we didn't connect on this thing. But, so it's really nice to meet someone who's not like that. See, it's the same exact thing, but presented in a different way, where what you're doing is you're saying, "Hey, you're better than other women that I've met," and women love to be better than other women. So yeah, so testing, definitely do it. And I've given you multiple examples of how to go about doing it in a reasonable way. And by the way, women should be doing this stuff too. Nothing I'm saying here is exclusive to men. Women should be doing this stuff too. And what I would say about you women is that if a guy wants to take you out, if you like his personality, it's not like you're required to sleep with him because you go on a date with him. So if he takes you out, go on a date with him and see how it is. And then if it's not, and see if it develops into the future. It's interesting because traditionally there was this story about the kissing the frogs. And these days women don't want to kiss any frogs anymore. They just want to kiss princes. And I think this is one of the problems with a lot of the dating situation now. And and it's, I think, largely driven, a big part of it is driven by social media, because we get this sense that we know someone much more than we actually do. Whereas before, it was very clear that you didn't know someone. And the only way to get to know them was to spend some time with them. And so you didn't know if they were a frog or a prince, and you had to show up and you had to spend time with them. Now, because of social media, women are only choosing to go out, are largely only choosing to go out with guys who appear to be princes, and many of those guys are actually frogs, and they're ignoring the other half. So that would be my advice for women is, you need to change how you're evaluating guys. I hope that was helpful. Actually, if you paid attention to that, I know it was very helpful. I've taught this to tons of guys, and it's worked for them. And so if you use it, it'll work for you too.